Good evening, you. Not the version of you that performs competence all day, but the private you, the one who has been carrying something heavy without quite naming it. You arrive with a mind still buzzing, still replaying tasks, still gripping worries like they might slip away and become worse. So you let yourself be met gently, as if a door has opened somewhere inside you, and you are finally allowed to set the weight down without defending why you're tired. Right now, dawn mist lifts from quiet Hittite mountain pastures. Dew gathers on grass like tiny beads of light, and the first sun spreads slowly over the ridgeline, careful and soft. The air smells of juniper and wild thyme, clean enough to make your chest loosen. Everything looks half hidden, half revealed, and that feels right, because you too don't need to explain yourself all at once. And here is your small reality check. You probably won't survive this with your eyes open. Your eyelids will surrender. Your thoughts will wander off like a goat with strong opinions. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and let me know how your day has really been. Your worries, your exhaustion, or even a tiny joy that made you smile. I'm here to truly listen and offer the most sincere, heartfelt advice I can. Now turn off the lights, take a deep, slow breath, let your tiredness melt away, and gently close your eyes. Let's drift together into tonight's dreamlike lands. And tomorrow morning, if you still remember, send me a message and tell me what you dreamed. You begin walking as the pasture wakes in slow layers. Mist curls around your ankles, cool and thin, and your steps press damp grass down with a soft hush, releasing that bright green scent that feels almost medicinal. Ahead, shapes sharpen through the thinning fog. A low shelter leans into the hillside, posts, reeds, and packed earth arranged to turn away from the night wind. A fire pit sits at its center, yesterday's embers buried under pale ash. When someone stirs it, a faint thread of smoke rises and smells like charcoal and warmed stone. The warmth does not rush you, it just exists. The locals move with the calm of people who have lived beside weather long enough to stop arguing with it. Wool cloaks hang heavy on shoulders, darkened by lanolin and use. Leather straps cross chests and hips to secure bundles. A reed basket rests against a hip like it belongs there. Every motion looks practiced and kind to the body, like they have learned that panic burns more energy than the mountain will ever reimburse. You are welcomed without ceremony, which is the most sincere kind. A gesture points you to safer footing where slick stones could steal a step. A hand steadies you at a narrow turn, not to make you feel small, but to keep you upright, because upright is useful. No one stares, no one demands an explanation for how you got here. You are simply included, as if there is always room for one more person to share the morning. As mist lifts, the pasture becomes readable. There are no fences, only memory and landmarks, a cairn on a rise, a scar of path pressed into the slope by hooves, a lone tree gripping thin soil like a promise. Far below these highlands, towns keep records on clay, count herds, and press seals into wet tablets. Up here, Life is recorded in quieter ways, in the worn smoothness of a staff, in the careful stacking of fuel, in the way water is guided into a shallow trough so nothing is wasted. Near the shelter, clay jars sit on flat stones to keep them out of the damp ground. Skins are stretched and drying. Twine and needles are tucked into a small pouch that looks like it has rescued many days from becoming disasters. Nothing is decorative for vanity, and yet everything is beautiful. Beautiful because it works, because it has been handled, repaired, trusted. You watch someone kneel beside a wooden pail of milk, testing warmth with 2 fingers, then working with steady rhythm. Milk becomes something stronger, strained, set, stirred, prepared to last beyond the morning. In that repetition, your own nervous system begins to copy the pattern. You stop anticipating the next problem. You just notice what is here. The sun clears the ridge without drama. Mist retreats in soft sheets, and the pasture reveals patches of gold light and darker, damp hollows that hold the night a little longer. Animals begin to stand, stretch, and graze with unhurried confidence. The bell rings once more, then settles into the background, satisfied that you remember where you are. Your shoulders drop. Your jaw unclenches. The inside of your head grows quieter, not because your life is solved, but because this place does not demand that you solve it right now. You breathe in cold time and clean wind, and you let the moment be simple. You take one more careful step into the widening light, and the story opens, ancient, gentle, and patient, ready to carry you deeper into these high pastures where even time seems to walk softly. You keep moving while the light grows braver. The pasture no longer looks like a secret, but it still holds its softness. Mist thinning in slow, obedient sheets, dew shining on every blade of grass, as if the ground has decided to wear jewelry for no particular reason. A path appears under your feet, not built with pride, not signed, not defended by fences, just a patient line worn into the slope by generations of hooves and careful boots. It guides you the way a good habit guides you, quietly, repeatedly, without demanding applause. You follow it because the earth itself seems to say, yes, this is the safest way. The herd spreads ahead of you in a loose, living cloud. Sheep move as one idea, pressing shoulder to shoulder like they're sharing warmth and gossip without needing words. Goats, of course, behave like goats, wandering off to inspect a rock, a tuft of leaves, the concept of rebellion, then snapping back into place as if their independence was just a quick stretch. You remember your own wandering thoughts from a moment ago and feel a small, tender amusement. Apparently, you and the goats share a coping strategy: drift, investigate, return. Along the outer edge, a dog glides with practiced focus. It doesn't perform, it doesn't bark for attention. It simply holds the boundary of the herd like a moving fence made of muscle and intention. Its eyes are always counting, always measuring distance, always deciding whether a stray step needs correction. The dog's calm is not softness, it is competence without noise. You realize how rare that feels, competence without theater. And something in you relaxes further, as if you're learning that safety can be quiet. The locals walk in that same quiet competence. Their bodies know the slope. They know where stone turns slick, where mud clings, where hollow holds water long after the sun begins to warm the ridge. They do not hurry. They do not fight the land. They move like people who understand that rushing only creates new problems that will have to be fixed later with colder fingers. You begin noticing the tools they carry, and how little those tools resemble equipment, and how much they resemble anatomy. A staff is not a stick, it is an extra limb, a stabilizer on uneven ground, a pointer that says, "Step there, not there." A sling hangs at the hip, not as a dramatic weapon, but as a practical punctuation mark, something that can send a stone near a stubborn animal without needing a chase that wastes time and breath. A small pouch holds the mountain's little saviors: twine, a needle, a shard of flint, perhaps a pinch of salt, the kind of items that stop an inconvenience from becoming a crisis. You think of your own modern pouch: phone, keys, charger, maybe a headache tablet, and you feel the strange continuity of humans needing small objects to keep larger days from collapsing. As the mist lifts higher, the land reveals the logic of its usage. Trails braid across the slope like faint handwriting. Here the herd prefers to pass. Here it avoids. Here it pauses. A cluster of juniper stands like a dark, fragrant shield where wind loses its confidence. A scatter of pale stone offers shade that will matter later when the sun grows insistent. This is not random scenery. It is a working landscape, and everyone here reads it the way you read a familiar street in your own city, where you know which corner floods when it rains, which shop opens early, which alley shortens the walk home. You see markers, too, piles of stones set with intention at turns and ridgelines, where fog can trick the eye and lead the body into the wrong valley. These cairns are a language made of rock, a message left for anyone who comes after. This way keeps you found. Somewhere down below, in towns you can't see from here, scribes press wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets listing sheep, grain, obligations, names. That kind of writing holds authority in the lowlands. Up here, authority looks like a cairn that prevents a herd from disappearing into the wrong fold of mountain. The path curves and you get a wider view, layers of hills fading into one another, the kind of distance that makes your problems feel smaller without insulting them. You don't see the great centers of power from here, but you feel their pull in subtle ways: a sturdier strap, a bit of dyed wool, a rhythm of movement that suggests these pastures are not isolated. They feed something larger. The mountain sends wool, milk, meat, labor, quiet wealth. In return, the wider world sends tools, salt, metal, maybe the occasional official who pretends to understand grass. You walk beside your guides, and without any fuss, they adjust their pace to match yours. When the ground turns tricky, a hand reaches back, not grabbing, not dragging, simply offering stability. The gesture is ordinary, and not ordinariness makes it feel safe. You are not treated like a visitor who must be entertained. You are treated like a body in motion that matters enough to keep upright. It is a kind of care that doesn't ask for gratitude, which is precisely why it lands in you so deeply. A breeze threads through the pasture, cool and clean. The last ribbons of mist tear away and vanish into light. Animals settle into grazing with steady devotion, heads down, mouths working, turning grass into tomorrow. The bell's sound becomes softer now, more occasional, less a signal and more a reassurance that everything is where it should be. And you too begin to feel where you should be, right here, on this worn path, in this slow morning, learning that the world can be managed one careful step at a time. You let your breathing match the herd's pace, unhurried, consistent, and you continue forward as if the mountain itself is teaching you how to be gentle without becoming fragile. You drift closer to the camp again as the morning settles into its true temperature, no longer night cold, not yet noon warm, but that clean middle state where the air feels like it's been washed. Smoke rises from the hearth in a thin, steady ribbon, and it carries a scent that makes your stomach remember it is allowed to be simple. Warm ash, toasted grain, the faint tang of sour milk. The shelter is low and practical, leaning into the hillside as if it knows exactly which direction the wind likes to bully. Inside, the ground is tamped flat, swept clean of sharp stones. A few woven mats lie near the fire pit, and the arrangement makes it obvious. People rest here, work here, eat here, and keep living in the same small circle of warmth. There is no separate room for comfort and no separate room for labor. The two are braided together, like wool. Someone sets a pot near the embers and tends the heat with the patient care of a person who has ruined enough meals to learn humility. The fire is coaxed, not commanded. A thin stick prods the coals until they glow brighter, and the warmth spreads outward in a slow pulse that you feel in your hands before you feel it in your face. You hold your palms toward it, fingers slightly curved, and the heat kisses your skin like a quiet apology from the night. The locals don't announce hospitality, they just make space. A mat is shifted. A bowl is placed within reach. You are guided by small gestures that say, sit, warm up, eat, rest your mind. Nobody performs kindness. They practice it the way they practice everything else: repetition, usefulness, consistency. The food is the kind that does not pretend. It has the honest taste of survival refined into comfort. A coarse bread, flat and sturdy, holds the smell of grain and smoke. A thick dairy mixture, strained, cultured, slightly sharp, waits in a clay bowl, cool against your fingertips when you steady it. There may be a drizzle of honey if the season has been generous, or dried fruit if someone planned ahead. The flavors don't shout, they settle. You take a bite, and it is grounding in the most literal way, the taste of earth turned into nourishment. Your body receives it with gratitude so immediate it almost feels embarrassing, as if you've been pretending you don't need anything, and now bread is exposing you. You chew slowly, and the slow chewing becomes another kind of calm. It gives your thoughts a rhythm to follow that isn't anxious. Near the hearth, a wooden pail of milk is being transformed, quietly, steadily, into something that will last longer than a morning. A cloth is stretched over a bowl, and the liquid is poured through with careful hands. Whey drips down in pale threads. Curds gather like soft snow. Someone stirs, then waits, then stirs again, as if patience is a tool just as important as any knife. You notice how the camp treats time. In the modern world, time is something that sprints away from you. Here, time is something you work with. Heat takes as long as it takes. Milk turns when it turns. Bread cooks when the embers are ready. You can't bully any of it into speed without paying for that arrogance later. It is strangely soothing to be in a place where the world refuses to be hurried, because it means you are not failing when you slow down. You are simply matching reality. Outside, the herd grazes within view, a moving field of backs and ears. A younger animal nudges another, testing boundaries. A bell rings once, then quiets, as if even the metal is learning to conserve its energy. The dog circles and pauses, watching. The dog's stillness is not laziness, it is vigilant economy. You think again of how much you waste, not money, not time, but attention. How much of your attention is spent on imaginary disasters that never arrive. Here, attention is spent like water in a dry season, carefully. A breeze slips in under the shelter edge, carrying the scent of thyme and sun-warmed stone. Someone adjusts a cloak around their shoulders, then goes back to work without complaint. You watch the rhythm of their hands, twisting fiber, knotting cord, checking straps, scraping a tool clean. The small maintenance tasks that prevent big failures. You realize this is what civilization looks like when you strip away monuments, 1,000 tiny acts of upkeep performed with quiet seriousness. You shift slightly on the mat, and the earth beneath you feels firm and honest. Your eyelids grow heavier, not from boredom, but from safety. Your nervous system begins to understand that no one is about to demand you perform. You are allowed to be present without being impressive. The camp is alive with soft sounds, the scrape of a pot on stone, the rustle of wool, the faint clack of a wooden spoon, the occasional breathy snort from a nearby animal. The sounds are small enough to be ignored, but soothing enough to be noticed. They create a blanket of normal life, and you let that normal life cover you. You finish your bread slowly, tasting the last smoky crumbs. You wipe your fingers on a scrap of cloth, practical and unceremonious. The locals continue their work, and you sense an invitation that is not spoken. You may watch, you may help, you may simply sit and learn how to be quiet again. So you stay near the hearth a little longer, letting warmth seep into your hands and into the parts of you that have been cold for reasons that had nothing to do with weather. You rise from the hearth's warmth with the slow permission of a body that finally believes it can. Outside, the pasture is brighter, the dampness lifting off the grass in tiny breaths, and the herd is already doing the day's most important work, turning sunlight into strength. The people around you shift from food to fiber, because in these mountains, warmth is not a comfort, it is a plan. They lead you to an open patch of ground where wind can pass through without being rude. Animals are gathered with calm efficiency. A sheep is steadied. A knee braces. A tool flashes briefly in the sun and then disappears into wool. Shearing is a practical harvest. The cut must be close enough to matter, careful enough not to harm, quick enough that the animal stays calm. Blades, bronze where it's available, sharpened stone where it isn't, work with a rasping whisper. Fleece peels away in thick sheets like clouds being folded. The sheep's body emerges smaller, almost startled at its own shape, and the air touches its skin in a way that makes you instinctively want to offer a blanket. But nobody here shears on impulse. They time it to weather the way you time errands to rain. They read the season in signs your modern eyes would miss. How long morning mist clings to hollows, how the wind tastes colder on one ridge than another, how the grass dries after sunrise. They know when the sun will hold and when it will betray. Wool is collected because winter will arrive whether or not you feel ready, and the mountain does not accept excuses as currency. The fleece is sorted immediately. Coarser portions are set aside for sturdier uses, softer sections reserved for anything that will touch skin. Nothing is wasted unless it is truly unusable. Even then, scraps become padding, bindings, patches. Trash feels like a word that belongs to towns, not to slopes where everything must earn its keep. You follow as bundles are carried down to a shallow stream fed by springs in malt water. The water looks innocent until you touch it, then it bites your fingers awake. Hands plunge in anyway because drama does not warm you. Clean wool does. Fleece is soaked, pressed, rinsed, and squeezed, the stream briefly clouding with dust before it runs clear again. The smell shifts as it cleans, less animal, more wet stone and clean earth. You help where you can. You hold a section steady while it's rinsed. You lift and shake it out, watching droplets scatter into sunlight like tiny thrown coins. You learn the difference between scrubbing that damages fibers and pressing that persuades dirt to leave. The repetition is oddly soothing. It gives your mind something honest to do, something that ends when you finish it. Back at the camp, the cleaned wool is spread to dry where air can pass through. Strands lift and settle with each breeze, and you see how craft and weather are married. Too much sun and fibers become brittle, too little and damp lingers, inviting rot. The locals spread wool with the same attention you'd give to fragile paper, not out of sentiment, but because respect is efficient. When it's dry, the wool is teased and combed. Simple tools, wood and bone, sometimes studded with thorns or metal, pull fibers into alignment. The motion is steady. Draw, lift, smooth, repeat. The wool becomes airy, then coherent, ready to become thread. You notice how they sit while they work, backs slightly curved, shoulders relaxed, wrists loose. Even in labor, they protect the body, because a broken body is a broken household. And then you meet the spindle. It is almost offensively simple, a wooden shaft and a weighted whirl. Your modern brain wants to underestimate it, the way it underestimates anything that doesn't require a password. But when a practiced hand sets it spinning, you feel something quietly astonishing, the conversion of softness into strength. Fibers twist, tension balances, a thin line of yarn appears where there was only fluff. The spindle hangs and turns like a tiny planet, and you realize that technology is not always loud. Sometimes it is a turning weight, a steady wrist, and a day made survivable. You try because you are here and because you want to believe you can learn without being perfect. Your first attempt is predictably messy. The twist goes uneven, the spindle wobbles, the fiber snaps, or else becomes a lumpy rope that could tow a small boat. Somewhere in the pasture, a goat probably judges you. You don't take it personally. You take a breath, slow your hands, and try again. With guidance that arrives through example rather than speeches, you learn to feed fibers steadily, to let the spindle do the work, to accept that thread is coaxed into existence. In that coaxing, your own inner pace adjusts. You are used to yanking results out of time. Here, you let results spin out of patience. As yarn gathers, it is wound carefully and kept clean, protected from damp. Later, it will be woven into cloth, stitched into garments, layered into cloaks that hold heat against winter wind. You picture the ridge you walked at dawn, the mist lifting, the bell's soft ring, and you understand the quiet heroism of this craft. It is not glamorous, it is life. The sun climbs higher, the pasture hums with small motion, animals grazing, birds cutting the air, hands turning fiber into future. And you, seated among them, feel something settle into place. Warmth can be made, one twist at a time, and the most patient work is often the work that saves you. When the wool is set aside to dry and the spindles slow, the day shifts its focus the way a flock shifts direction, softly, without debate, as if the air itself has signaled a change. You notice it first in the way hands pause, then in the way bodies turn toward a gentle rise beyond the main camp. The pasture is still the pasture, grass, stone, wind, but something in the movement says this next place is not only useful, it is meaningful. You follow, stepping carefully through sunlit damp. The ground here feels slightly different underfoot, firmer, less churned by hooves, as if the animals instinctively keep their distance. A low cluster of stones comes into view, not piled randomly like a windbreak, but arranged with a quiet intention. No grand temple walls, no towering columns, just a modest, sacred spot that fits the mountain the way a whisper fits a quiet room. The stones form a small enclosure, a boundary that says, "This space is held." Inside, the earth is cleared and flattened. A few smooth rocks rest near the center, darkened as if they've been touched by oil or smoke. You see traces of ash, not fresh, but not ancient either, evidence that this place is visited often, that reverence is not reserved for special occasions. It is part of the routine, like milking and spinning, because life is easier when you remember you are not the biggest thing on the mountain. You stand at the edge and feel your own instincts hesitate. In modern life, sacred spaces are often framed by rules and signs, by instructions about what to do with your hands and your voice. Here, there is no signage. You are expected to notice, to read the atmosphere, to understand that quiet is a form of respect. The locals approach in a simple line, not solemn in a theatrical way, but careful. One person carries a small bundle, maybe grain, maybe dried fruit, maybe a pinch of salt wrapped in cloth. Another holds a shallow dish with a little oil, sunlight catching on its surface. A third brings a few sprigs of thyme and juniper, green and fragrant. The offerings are humble because the people are not trying to impress a god. They are trying to maintain balance. You let your gaze move across the slope. The sky is wide here, and the mountains don't pretend they were made for humans. They were made for weather, for stone, for time. The idea of a storm suddenly feels personal. The idea of a good season feels like grace. You begin to understand why people who live this close to risk develop rituals that are not about superstition, but about steadiness, ways to hold themselves together when the world can change in a single afternoon. Hands move with practiced care. A small amount of grain is scattered onto the earth, not thrown, but placed. Oil is dabbed onto a stone, a sheen that catches the light. The thyme and juniper are set down, and their scent rises, sharp and clean, as if the plants are offering themselves too. Someone brushes a palm lightly over the stones, then over their own chest, a gesture that seems to say, "What is out there is also in here." You don't know the names attached to this place, and you don't need to. In the Hittite world, mountains and storms and springs are not just scenery, they are presences. People speak of weather with the seriousness of a neighbor who can either help you or ruin your week. There are gods and spirits tied to sky, to earth, to water. There are stories that explain why thunder matters, why fertility is fragile, why protection must be asked for with humility. You feel the weight of that worldview not as doctrine, but as a kind of psychological realism. When you rely on rain and grass and healthy animals, you learn to respect forces you cannot control. You stand quietly and let your own thoughts settle. You realize how rarely you do this in your daily life, how rarely you pause without needing a reason that can be justified. You spend so much time proving your usefulness that you forget you can simply exist. Here, the pause itself is useful. It resets the nervous system. It reminds the body that it belongs to something larger than schedules. A breeze moves through the enclosure, and it feels like the mountain breathing. The stones are cool in the shade, warm where the sun touches them. Somewhere behind you, the herd makes a soft shifting sound, and you hear a bell ring once, distant but present, like a thread tying sacredness back to ordinary life. Then you notice something small, a shallow groove in one stone, worn smooth, as if a hand has traced it many times, not once, not twice, many. That groove is history you can touch. It is the record of people returning to the same place with the same needs: health, safety, enough food, a calm season, a surviving child, a manageable winter. You feel suddenly tender toward them, toward the human habit of asking the world to be kind. You don't perform a gesture you don't understand. You simply stand with them, breathing slowly, letting the quiet do what quiet has always done: soften the edges of fear. In this moment, you are not an outsider trying to imitate. You are a human body in a human ritual, acknowledging that you cannot control everything, and that asking for steadiness is not weakness. When the offerings are placed and the motions complete, there is no dramatic ending, no proclamation, no show. People simply turn back toward the camp, their steps a fraction lighter, as if the act of remembering the sacred made the day easier to carry. You follow them down the rise, and as you re-enter the working world of hearth and herd, you carry a new quiet inside you, one that doesn't demand explanation, one that simply makes room for the next breath. You return from the little shrine with the feeling that something invisible has been tidied inside you. Not solved, nothing so dramatic, but arranged. Your thoughts feel less scattered, as if they've been gently herded into a safer field. Back at the camp, the day leans into its next practical truth. Seasons are unreliable. Hunger is patient, and the mountain does not provide on demand. So the people here do what sensible humans have always done. They turn abundance into insurance. You follow the scent first. Smoke, but not just smoke. This is smoke with purpose, controlled, steady, flavored by wood that has been chosen rather than grabbed. Near the shelter, a simple rack stands over a low, slow fire. Strips of meat hang in quiet rows, not dripping, not dramatic, just drying in the thin mountain air. Nearby, shallow trays hold clusters of herbs and sliced fruits, laid out like small offerings to the sun. Salt sits in a pouch, precious as certainty. Someone brings you closer, and you see the system behind the scent. The fire is not roaring, it's disciplined. A roaring fire eats fuel, scorches food, and demands constant attention. A disciplined fire smolders, produces consistent smoke, and lets people work on other tasks without disaster creeping in. You realize how many of your modern problems are essentially roaring fire problems. Too much heat, too little control, too much urgency, and not enough planning. Salt becomes the first lesson. It is handled with care, measured not in fancy spoons, but in practiced pinches. The locals rub it into cuts of meat, working it into fibers with firm fingers. Salt draws moisture out, changes the texture, makes decay less eager. It is chemistry done by intuition, science practiced as habit. You watch and understand that preservation is not about keeping food as it is about transforming it into something time cannot bully as easily. The smoke does the next part. It curls around hanging strips, sinks into surface fats, adds a barrier and a flavor and a memory of fire. It also brings a scent that will cling to clothing and hair, a reminder later that today's work mattered. Your modern life has plenty of smells: traffic, detergent, stale office air, but very few smells that mean survival. This smell means survival, and your body registers it as something serious and oddly comforting. You are given a small task, no grand initiation, just something useful. You help arrange strips so they don't touch, so air can move between them. You check the fire, pushing a piece of wood slightly closer, then slightly away, learning the delicate balance between too much heat and too little. The heat warms your face. The smoke stings your eyes just enough to make you blink slower. You feel the slow, hypnotic pull of the process, the way repetitive work quiets the mind by giving it a single, honest thing to focus on. Nearby, dairy becomes another kind of storage. Clay jars, thick-walled and slightly porous, sit in the shade where temperatures stay more stable. Some are sealed with cloth and resin. Some are weighted with stones. Inside them, milk has been turned into firmer forms: sour milk, curds, butter-like fats, things that travel better and last longer. The tang in the air is clean, sharp, alive. Fermentation is not treated as a magical accident. It is treated as a reliable partner if you respect it. You notice how these methods are layered: salt, smoke, sun, shade, clay, air, patience. No single method carries the whole burden. Each method reduces risk. Together, they create resilience. You think of your own modern preservation strategies, freezers, expiration dates, delivery apps, and you feel an odd gratitude that you live in a world where you can forget how fragile eating once was. Then you feel a small sting of respect for the people here who cannot afford to forget. Someone brings out bundles of herbs, thyme, savory, maybe wild onion greens. They are not just flavor, they are strategy. Herbs help repel pests. They mask off smells. They make plain staples feel nourishing rather than punishing. You watch a handful being rubbed over meat and realize that even comfort is planned here. Even pleasure has a practical purpose. If food tastes good, people eat enough to work. If people eat enough to work, they survive the winter. Tenderness, again, disguised as efficiency. The camp's rhythm continues around you. Tools are cleaned, water is fetched, a strap is repaired. A child, if there is one nearby, learns by watching, hands busy with small mimicry, building muscle memory for the future. The dogs remain alert at the edges, keeping the herd from drifting too far as the humans focus inward. Everything is interlocked. Nothing is isolated. You begin to understand the deep logic of community. One person tends the fire, another checks the animals, another repairs gear, and the whole group becomes safer than any individual could be alone. A gust of wind shifts the smoke, and for a moment it blows directly into your face. Your eyes water. You cough softly, reflexively, and helplessly, and it's almost funny how quickly your body betrays your attempt to look competent in front of people who have probably been breathing smoke since they were old enough to carry sticks. You recover, blinking, and you accept the small humiliation with grace. Nobody mocks you. Nobody needs to. The mountain already did it for them. As the afternoon approaches, the preserved goods are gathered and stored. Bundles tied, jars settled into protected spots, racks checked for stability. This is slow work, and that slowness is the point. Haste invites spoilage. Care invites survival. When you step back and look at what has been done, it isn't a feast. It's something more important, a future that feels less frightening. You feel that future in your chest, like a quiet reassurance. If they can take a fragile morning and turn it into winter strength, then perhaps you too can take what you have and make it last. Attention, energy, kindness, without burning it up in panic. The smoke drifts upward, thinning into sky, and you follow its rise with your eyes until your thoughts rise with it, lightening, settling again, calm. The smoke from the drying rack follows you like a quiet signature, clinging to your cloak and hair in the way certain days cling to memory. You step away from the hearth's orbit, and your lungs feel cleaner almost immediately, cool mountain air rinsing out the last sting of wood smoke. Yet the scent stays, stubborn and comforting, as if the camp is making sure you don't forget what prepared smells like. The people begin to move toward higher ground, and you go with them, because the mountain keeps offering new rooms without walls. The path narrows into a ridge trail where grass grows shorter and stones show their pale backs. As you climb, the pasture below becomes a quilt of moving dots, animals grazing, humans working, an entire life reduced to pattern. Up here, wind is more honest. It doesn't curl politely around you, It meets you directly, cool and firm, pressing against your chest as if to check whether you are awake. The ridge opens into a long, shallow saddle, and you see them. Horses. Not a cinematic stampede, not a dramatic rearing silhouette, just horses in the practical arrangement of people who value function over spectacle, tethered near a windbreak, watered, brushed, watched. Their bodies are lean and alert, muscles written clearly under skin, ears swiveling like little antennae collecting information you cannot hear. Their coats catch the sunlight differently than wool does, sleeker, more reflective, so that even standing still they look like they are moving. You feel the atmosphere around them shift. The herd animals you've been around all day carry calm weight. Horses carry attention. A horse's attention is a living thing. It travels fast. It snaps to sound. It reads intention in posture. You slow your movements without being told because something in your nervous system recognizes that this is an animal that notices. Hands move over flanks with familiarity, checking for heat, for soreness, for any small injury the animal might hide out of instinct. A brush made from stiff fibers drags dust away in rhythmic strokes. A comb follows. Hooves are lifted, inspected, cleaned, set down again with careful respect. This isn't pampering, it's maintenance in its most intimate form, the kind that keeps legs reliable, lungs clear, temper steady. You notice the tack, simple straps, worn leather, bits and rings where metal has found its place in this world. Nothing shiny for show, everything shaped by use. A strap is checked twice, then tightened, then checked again, because a failure on a ridge is not a mild inconvenience. A horse doesn't forgive sloppy fastening just because you had a long day. The mountain certainly won't. You are led along the line of animals, and you begin to understand why horses feel different here than they might in your imagination. In stories, horses belong to heroes. Here, horses belong to logistics. They are strength made portable. They are distance made manageable. They are time compressed into muscle and breath. The Hittite world is bigger than these pastures, and horses are part of how bigger becomes possible. From high ground, your mind starts sketching a network you can't fully see, routes that run from grazing lands down into valleys, toward towns and administrative centers, toward fortified places where officials count and record and seal promises into clay. You picture a messenger leaving such a place with a tablet wrapped in cloth, tucked into a leather satchel, the surface stamped with a seal, so the message carries identity, not just words. You picture that messenger climbing ridge after ridge to reach outlying camps like this one, where news matters because it changes decisions, when to move, where to graze, what to deliver, what to prepare. Even if you never touch a tablet, you feel how information travels here, not through glowing screens, but through bodies, human and animal, moving along paths that have been worn into the earth by repetition. Those cairns you saw earlier aren't just for lost herds, they're for routes, for reliability, for making sure a person carrying something important doesn't vanish into the wrong fold of land and lose a day that can't be replaced. A horse shifts its weight and blows out a long breath, warm air puffing into the cold like a small cloud. You find yourself breathing more slowly in response. There's something about the animal's calm that invites your own, not sleepy calm, alert calm, the kind that says, I am ready, but I am not panicking about it. You notice too the way people stand around horses, not directly in front, not directly behind, always angled, always aware of legs and mood. Their bodies speak a quiet language of respect. They don't treat the horse like a tool that happens to move. They treat it like a partner that can be harmed by arrogance. They keep hands firm but gentle. They keep voices low. They keep energy clean. One of the horses is loaded with a light pack, bundles tied down in balanced pairs, weight distributed with the practical wisdom you've been learning all day. You watch the knots, the tension, the little adjustments. It reminds you of the spinning earlier, the way thread requires balance to become useful. Everything in this world feels like that. Tension and release, pressure and patience, held in the right proportion so nothing snaps. As you look out from the ridge, you catch a faint line in the landscape, a track that runs along the spine of the hills, then dips out of sight. It is not a road in the modern sense, but it is a decision repeated so many times it has become geography. Your mind wants to label it: trade, administration, tribute, message, journey. You let the labels hover without locking them down. The truth is simpler. People need to reach each other, and horses help. The wind lifts again, stronger now, and you taste a slight change in it, something cooler, something that hints at weather moving in from somewhere beyond the ridge. Nothing urgent yet, just a quiet reminder that the mountain has moods, and those moods arrive whether or not you have finished your plans. You tuck that awareness away, the way you tuck away a spare cord or a pinch of salt, useful later. For now, you stand in the clean ridge light with horses breathing steadily nearby, and you feel the strange comfort of being connected to something larger than your own small worries. These pastures are not the edge of the world. They are a living seam in a wider fabric, wool and salt and smoke and clay, and messages stitched together by hooves and hands. You turn back toward camp slowly, carrying the ridge wind in your lungs and the scent of smoke on your cloak, and you sense the day preparing to ask you for a little more trust. You feel the weather before you see it clearly, the way you sometimes feel a change in someone's mood before they speak. The wind that was merely honest on the ridge becomes sharper, carrying a faint dampness that doesn't belong to clean morning air. Down in the pasture, the light dulls slightly, as if the sun has stepped behind a thin veil. The locals notice, without drama. Their bodies register the shift and begin adjusting, the way hands adjust a strap without thinking. No one says, "storm." They don't need to. The mountain speaks in pressure and scent and cloud texture, and these people are fluent. You walk back with them toward the camp, and along the way you see how preparation begins long before trouble arrives. The herd is nudged closer to safer ground, not crowded, just guided into a position where it can be gathered quickly if needed. Water containers are checked. Loose items are pulled under shelter. The fire area is tidied because wind loves to turn carelessness into mess. You watch these small actions pile up into a larger thing: readiness. Then you're given a simple responsibility, not a ceremonial honor, not an overly dramatic prove yourself moment. Just a task that matters enough to trust you with, and small enough that failure won't ruin anyone's life. You are guided to a line of drying wool and told, through gesture, through example, to keep an eye on it. If wind rises or rain comes fast, you must help pull it under cover. Wool that has been washed and combed is vulnerable. Wool becomes heavy, clumps, and can sour. It is not just inconvenience, it is days of work put at risk. You feel a mild jolt of pressure, the kind your modern brain recognizes instantly. Responsibility. Your chest tightens a little because you have learned to associate responsibility with blame. Here, responsibility feels different. It feels communal. It feels like being handed a corner of the blanket and asked to hold it steady while others fold. You position yourself near the wool, watching the sky like you're suddenly employed by clouds. The fibers lift and settle with each breeze, pale and soft, and you begin to see how easily wind could steal them, how a gust could snag a tuft, tumble it across grass, and scatter it like dandelion fluff. You keep your hands ready. The clouds gather slowly at first. Gray forms stack behind the ridge, thickening into heavier shapes. The light becomes flatter, shadows less defined. A bird cuts across the sky lower than before, as if seeking a better angle against the wind. You taste dampness again, and now it's clearer. Rain is not a distant rumor, it's on its way. You glance toward the herd. The animals sense it too. Their grazing becomes slightly more purposeful, as if they're trying to store a final mouthful of calm before the air changes. A few lift their heads, ears angled, scanning. The dog's posture sharpens, attention widening like a net. Around the camp, the locals move with increased efficiency, not speed. They tighten ropes. They add stones to the edges of a mat. They stack fuel higher, covering it so it won't be ruined. Someone checks a small drainage channel, clearing it of debris so water will be guided away from the shelter rather than pooling at the entrance. These are the details that separate discomfort from danger. You watch and realize the difference between "we're fine" and "we're miserable" is often a 10-minute task completed before the rain hits. A gust comes through, stronger than the others, and it tugs at the wool. Fibers flutter. The line strains. You step in, steadying a bundle with both hands, feeling it move like something alive. Another gust tries again, and this time it brings the first scattered drops, cold and sudden on your forearms, like the sky tapping you to get your attention. You don't panic, not because you're naturally brave, but because the atmosphere around you doesn't allow panic to feel useful. You remember what you've watched all day: steady hands, practiced motions, calm logistics. You take a breath, then begin gathering the wool. You lift sections carefully, folding them into manageable bundles. They are lighter than you expect, almost airy, but the dampness begins to add weight fast. You move with urgency now, but not frantic urgency, more like the urgency of a person who knows exactly what matters and is willing to do only that. Someone comes to help, not because you failed, but because help is the default. Together you carry wool under shelter, laying it out where air can still pass, where it will be protected from direct rain but not trapped in dampness. The placement matters. Too cramped and it won't dry. Too exposed and the rain will soak it. The locals understand this balance intuitively, and you copy their choices like a student learning by watching rather than being lectured. The rain increases. Drops turn into a steady patter on reeds and hides. The sound fills the camp in a way that is almost soothing, like the world playing percussion to lull you into quiet. But the wind has teeth now, pushing the rain sideways. You feel it on your cheeks, cool and insistent. You keep working. Gather, fold, carry, place. Repeat. Your hands start to chill, fingers stiffening slightly. You shake them once and continue. The task gives you a strange kind of comfort. Your mind has no room to spiral when your body is busy doing something clear. There is wool to save, and you are saving it. That is enough. When the last bundle is under cover, you step back and look at the line now empty, swaying in the wind like a relieved spine. The locals glance at what you've done, and you feel, again, without words, a quiet approval. Not praise, not flattery, just a sense that you held your corner of the blanket. The sky darkens another shade. The rain becomes steadier, heavier. But the camp feels prepared. Fuel is covered, wool is safe, the herd is closer, paths are clear. The small problem has been met early, before it could grow teeth. You stand under the shelter edge, listening to rain drum on reed and hide, and you feel a subtle shift in your own body. The anxiety that usually rides responsibility has loosened. Here, responsibility is not a trap. It is longing. And outside, the storm gathers itself, ready to arrive fully, while you and the mountain people wait, calm, coordinated, and quietly capable. The storm arrives the way the mountain always arrives, with no interest in your preferences. Rain thickens into a steady sheet that blurs the pasture and turns the distant ridgeline into a smudged ink line. Wind pushes the drops sideways, driving them under the shelter edge in cold needles, and the temperature falls fast enough that your skin notices before your mind can make a story about it. But the camp doesn't break. It tightens. People shift closer to the shelter's backbone, redistributing bodies and bundles like weights on a scale. Someone adds an extra hide along the windward side, pulling it down and anchoring it with stones. Another checks the drainage channel again, making sure water continues to flow away rather than pooling where feet need to move. The fire is protected, coaxed into staying alive under a careful cover, because warmth is not optional now. It's a stabilizer, a morale tool, a practical defense. You find yourself doing what you've already learned, scanning for what matters, ignoring what doesn't. You stop focusing on the drama of weather and start focusing on the mechanics of shelter. Where is the draft? Where is the weak tie? Which bundle might soak? Which animal might bolt? Your mind, which usually spins in circles when stress arrives, is suddenly pointed in one direction, like a spear rather than a cloud. Outside, the herd shifts into a tighter cluster. Sheep press together and become a living wall of wool, their backs slicked darker by rain. Goats tuck their heads and look offended by the entire concept of water falling from the sky. Cattle stand with stubborn patience, heads lowered, letting rain slide off their hides in rivulets. The dog moves in short, efficient arcs, correcting drift with presence rather than noise, keeping the group from thinning out into vulnerability. You stand near the shelter edge, watching the boundary, ready to help if an animal breaks away. The wind carries the smell of wet earth and crushed thyme, and the world feels stripped down to essentials: warmth, dryness, togetherness, and the stubborn continuation of breath. Someone passes you a cloak, heavier than yours, thicker, smelling of smoke and old wool. You wrap it around yourself and feel immediately how much wiser their clothing is than your instincts. It's not fashionable, it's armor. It holds a pocket of warm air against your body, and you understand that comfort in this world is not indulgence, it's survival engineered through layers. The rain drums on the shelter roof in a steady rhythm that would be soothing if it weren't also trying to seep into everything. The sound becomes a kind of lullaby with teeth. You focus on the fire. It's small now, a controlled glow, but it holds. Someone feeds it a stick at a time, letting the embers eat slowly. Smoke curls upward, trapped briefly under the roof before slipping out through gaps, carrying heat with it. You feel the loss of that heat like money leaving your pocket, and you understand why they guard it so carefully. In the middle of the storm, tasks continue, because tasks are what keep fear from becoming the loudest thing. A strap is tightened around a bundle that might soak. A clay jar is moved away from the edge where water splashes in. Wool is checked again, still dry enough, still airy enough. Someone wrings out a cloth and hangs it closer to the fire to dry. Someone else checks the animal trough, making sure runoff hasn't turned it muddy and undrinkable. These are not heroic actions. They are the actions that make heroism unnecessary. The wind surges, pushing hard against the shelter's side. The hides flap once, twice, like a pulse of danger. Stones hold, ropes hold. The structure flexes, but doesn't fail. You feel your heart jump anyway, because you are human and your body is allowed to react. Then you watch the locals, steady, unpanicked, and your heartbeat slows in shameful gratitude. Their calm is contagious, not because they are fearless, but because they have practiced. You start to notice small cues in their coordination. No one shouts. No one needs to. A glance is enough. A lifted hand signals, "Hold that." A shift of body signals, "Move closer." It's like watching a dance that has been rehearsed by necessity. You realize that their community is not just emotional support, it is an operating system. It turns a chaotic event into a series of manageable steps. You take a turn helping with the shelter edge, pulling a flap down when wind tries to lift it. Your hands press into damp hide, feeling its rough texture, smelling rain and smoke and animal. You anchor it with a stone, then reposition the stone when the wind changes angle. You learn in real time that storms are not one-directional problems. They move, they test, they look for the weakest point. Outside, a lamb bleats, a small, thin sound barely heard over rain. It has drifted slightly away from the densest cluster, confused by the pressure of bodies and the noise of weather. The dog moves toward it, not aggressive, just present, guiding it back with a practiced arc. You step forward too, because your body wants to help. You move slowly, careful not to startle. The lamb finds the familiar wall of wool again and disappears into it like a thought slipping back into a calmer mind. The storm holds for what feels like a long time, but in truth it is measured in practical moments. How long the fire stays alive, how long the herd stays together, how long people can keep hands warm enough to tie knots. Eventually, the rain's intensity softens slightly. The wind eases from a shove to a push. The sound on the roof changes from a roar to a persistent tapping. No one declares victory. They simply keep doing what they've been doing because the mountain can change its mind. But you feel the camp's tension loosen by a small degree. Shoulders drop, movement slow again. The fire is allowed to glow a little brighter. Someone shakes water from a cloak and resettles it around their shoulders. You look out into the rain-softened pasture and feel a strange emotional clarity. It's not that the storm is beautiful, though it has its own wild elegance. It's that you are witnessing competence in its purest form. Calm, collective, unglamorous, effective. You are seeing what it looks like to meet a problem without turning it into a tragedy. And inside you, something shifts with the weather. You realize that you too can be like this. Not always, not perfectly, but sometimes. You can tighten, not break. You can choose steps, not panic. You can hold your corner of the blanket while the storm passes. The rain continues, lighter now, and the camp holds steady in its quiet circle of warmth, waiting for the next instruction the mountain will offer. The storm doesn't end with a grand curtain call. It simply loses interest. The rain thins from a hard sheet into a soft, persistent tapping, then into scattered drops that fall like afterthoughts. Wind relaxes from a shove into a cool, steady breath. The sky lightens in patches, and the pasture begins to show its color again. Green deepened by wet, stones darkened and glossy, the whole slope smelling like clean earth that has just been rinsed of its worry. You step out from the shelter's edge and feel the world exhale. Mist starts to rise. Not the dawn mist from earlier, but a new kind, steam-like, born from sun touching wet grass. It lifts in pale veils from hollows and animal backs. Everything glitters. Every leaf and blade of grass carries a bead of water, and the light catches those beads so insistently you almost feel like the mountain is trying to distract you on purpose, which is clever because distraction is how you get careless, and carelessness is how small problems grow teeth. The locals don't celebrate, they check. They check the shelter ties, they check the fire, they check the wool bundles, still airy enough, still safe. They check the clay jars for moisture at the rims. They check the herd, counting by instinct rather than numbers, scanning for limps, for shivers, for a goat that looks too pleased with itself. The dog does its own inventory, circling once, twice, then settling into watchful stillness, as if filing a silent report. You follow their gaze and realize something. The pasture sounds different now. After rain, you expect a kind of dripping chorus, water falling from reeds, trickling off stones, pattering into puddles. You do hear that, but you don't hear what you've been hearing all day. The bell. That modest ring that kept threading through your hours, morning reassurance, grazing rhythm, distance marker in fog, has gone missing from the soundscape. At first, you think it's simply muffled by wet air, the way your own thoughts get muffled when you're tired. You tilt your head, listening harder. No ring, no occasional metallic note, just breathing animals, soft hoof shifts, and water dripping. A strange emptiness opens in you, which is an unexpectedly emotional reaction to a piece of metal. Your modern brain tries to be superior about it. Really? A bell? But your mountain part of you already understands. That bell is not decoration, it's orientation. In mist, in dusk, in a landscape with no fences, a bell is a moving lighthouse. It tells you where together is. The locals notice too, not with panic, never with panic, but with a subtle tightening at the shoulders, the way their bodies tighten when a strap looks worn. They move through the herd with practiced attention, searching necks, checking the lead animals. A broken leather thong is found, damp and frayed where it snapped under stress. The bell's strap has given up sometime during the storm, or during the scramble to keep the herd tight, or during that moment when the wind slapped everything sideways and nobody had the luxury to listen for small sounds. The bell itself is gone. You feel the camp's mood shift by a careful degree, not fear exactly, more like recalibration. The mountain is quiet now, but evening will come, and evening mist will rise again, and without the bell, the herd becomes harder to hold, harder to find if an animal drifts, harder to gather quickly if weather returns. This is the kind of missing thing that seems small until it isn't. And because the universe enjoys irony, the air is already turning luminous and gentle, as if to say, "See, everything is fine." The pasture is even prettier now. Wet grass shining, cloud gaps revealing slices of blue, sunlight catching steam like a slow miracle. You almost want to laugh at how reality works. It cleans everything up and then asks you to solve a problem anyway. The locals begin making a plan with movement. One person secures the remaining animals closer to the camp, shifting them into a safer bowl of land where drifting would be slower and more noticeable. Another tends the fire, because warmth remains the anchor for everything else. Someone checks the leather supplies, already preparing a replacement strap. The system keeps running even as the missing piece is acknowledged. Then you are folded into the solution naturally, the way you were folded into the storm work. You're guided, again with gestures, with expectation rather than speech, towards the likely path the bell took. If the strap broke, the bell could have dropped anywhere between the shelter and the herd's tight cluster, or along the ridge trail where wind is strongest. It could have rolled downhill, hidden in wet grass. It could have lodged against a stone. The mountain has 1,000 ways to swallow a small object. You look across the pasture and feel the scope of the task. In daylight, it seems manageable. In dusk, it will become a different story. Mist will thicken, shadows will hide depressions, the bell's dull metal will blend into wet stone, and the truly annoying part is that bells, once they're not ringing, are very good at being silent. You begin scanning the ground the way you scanned the shelter edges, methodical, calm, eyes trained to notice what doesn't belong. You step carefully along the churned patches where animals clustered in the storm, checking the mud for impressions that might hold a hint of metal. You move towards the ridge-facing side, where wind would have pulled at straps and tugged at necks. Your boots sink slightly in softened earth, and you're reminded that the mountain has changed texture. It is temporarily more slippery, more willing to trip you, which feels like a personal insult, but is actually just physics being itself. As you search, your mind offers you useful little callbacks. You remember the cairns, stone markers set where fog confuses direction, and you imagine the bell might have rolled until it met a boundary like that, something solid enough to stop it. You remember the dog's arcs around the herd, and consider that the bell could be near the outer edge where correction happens. You remember the goat's talent for turning any situation into chaos, and privately decide you will not blame them unless you find the bell inside a goat's personal stash of stolen items, which is frankly still on the table. The locals don't treat the loss as a catastrophe, but they also don't dismiss it. They know the difference between small and unimportant. This is unimportant until fog arrives and a single animal wanders, and suddenly the whole afternoon becomes a search with higher stakes. So they choose to search now while light is still cooperative. The sun slides out more fully from behind cloud, and the pasture brightens in a way that feels almost tender. Steam lifts, droplets fall from reeds in slow ticks. The world looks freshly washed, and you walk through it with careful eyes, looking for one ordinary, crucial piece of metal that carries the sound of togetherness. You keep moving because there is still time before night, and because you have learned in these mountains that calm is not passive. Calm is a decision to keep taking the next practical step until the missing thing is found. You keep searching with the kind of attention you usually reserve for finding your keys when you're already late. Except here, being late means dusk arrives, mist returns, and the pasture quietly becomes a different, less cooperative planet. The ground still holds the storm's handwriting. Mud has set into shallow prints, and grass is pressed in swirls where bodies lean together for warmth. You slow down enough to read those marks the way the locals do, not as mess, but as movement. Hoofprints point, overlap, fade, then sharpen again where an animal hesitated. A sheep's neat impressions gather into tight clusters. A goat's prints scatter off at angles, then loop back as if it remembered community is inconveniently real. You begin at the densest churned area, the storm cluster, because that is where straps would have tugged and necks would have jostled. You scan for what doesn't belong, a curved edge too smooth to be stone, a small patch of grass pressed into a round skid, a dark notch in mud that looks like weight fell and bounced. Every droplet tries to become a false clue. You let the glitter be pretty and keep your eyes trained on shape and shadow. The locals fan out without fuss, spacing themselves so each person's gaze covers a strip of ground. No one explains it. The formation appears like a practiced habit, and you copy it, keeping your eyes low and your pace steady. Your mind tries to sprint into unhelpful stories. What if it's gone forever? What if the herd drifts later? What if you're wasting everyone's time? But the work keeps pulling you back. Left, right, forward, repeat. You start following boundaries, because small things keep moving until they meet something that stops them. You check the bases of larger rocks where a bell might have rolled and lodged. You check shallow drainage channels where storm water ran, fingers brushing cold mud, feeling for smooth metal under grit. You check where grass gives way to packed earth, because a rolling object often chooses the easiest path. As you move, you retrace the day like a thread you can pull. The ridge trail where the wind sharpened, the horse saddle where the air felt cleaner and more forceful, the path back down where you first tasted dampness, the moment you held the shelter flap while hides tried to lift. Each memory becomes a filter that narrows the search from anywhere to likely. A cairn comes into view, one of those stone markers that keeps travelers from drifting into the wrong valley when fog thickens. You feel a small pulse of hope. Cairns are honest boundaries. A rolling bell might have bumped into one and stopped. You circle the stones and peer into the damp grass around their base. Water beads on the rocks, turning them glossy. Your eyes catch a dozen almost bells, a curled leaf, a slick stone with a bright edge, a knot of dark earth. You let the almosts pass without grabbing at them. You begin listening as well as looking, not for ringing, there is no ring, but for the tiny sounds objects make when they're nudged. Your boot brushes a stone and it ticks. A twig snaps, sharp and clean. You borrow a staff and tap lightly through the grass to lift flattened blades and feel resistance. The motion is gentle and oddly calming, like brushing hair with care because tangles aren't solved by force. The dog weaves through the searching humans, pausing at the pasture's edge as if checking that the herd remains gathered. It returns, nose low, reading damp earth with a seriousness that makes your own efforts feel charmingly amateur. Its attention lingers near a patch of juniper where wind is quieter, where rolling objects might have been caught in stiff branches. You move that way, not running, simply trusting the logic of shelter and gravity. Juniper needles hold droplets that fall onto your hands like cold beads. You part the branches carefully and scan beneath. The ground is darker here, littered with needles and small stones, exactly the kind of place a bell could vanish. You crouch and search inch by inch, lifting debris, shifting a flat stone and setting it back, letting your fingers feel where your eyes lose contrast. A faint metallic glint catches at the edge of your vision, dull, not shiny, half buried where wet grass mats against a root. Your heart does that small, hopeful jump it always does when it thinks relief is near. You pinch and pull. The object resists, then yields with a soft suction sound. It isn't the bell. It's a small ring from a strap or fastener, useful in its own way, and it tells you something important. This spot collects what the storm throws away. Disappointment flickers, then settles into steadier clarity. You are in the right kind of place. You tuck the ring aside and widen your search downhill, tracing the shallow groove where water ran hardest. The light begins to soften at the edges, as if afternoon is already rehearsing dusk. Mist isn't here yet, but you can feel it waiting in the hollows, ready to rise when the sun drops. You take a slow breath, taste wet thyme on the air, and keep moving. Sweep, step, scan, following the gentle slope toward a shallow bowl where storm water gathered, and where a bell, silent and stubborn, might be resting just out of sight. You follow the slope down into a shallow bowl where storm water collected, because gravity is always honest about where it takes things. The grass here is darker and heavier, pressed flat in places where runoff slid through like a cold hand. Small puddles sit in uneven depressions, reflecting the sky in broken pieces. The air is clean but damp, and it smells like wet stone and crushed thyme, freshness with a faint edge. You slow your pace, scanning for that dull curve of metal, that wrong texture among reeds and mud. You move the way you've been moving all day, careful, steady, trying to read the mountain's clues rather than argue with them. And then you make the most human mistake possible. You see a glint. Not a proud, polished shine, just a small, stubborn flash near the rim of a puddle, half hidden under flattened grass. Your mind snaps into excitement with the enthusiasm of someone who thinks they've finally found the missing piece of the universe. Relief rises so fast it almost feels like it's already true. Your body leans forward before your judgment catches up, and you take a quick step, just one, onto ground that looks firm, but is in fact the mountain's idea of a prank. Your boot slides. It doesn't slide dramatically like a heroic fall. It slides in the quiet, humiliating way that makes you aware of every millimeter of lost control. Mud accepts your soul with eager affection. Your balance tilts. Your arms do that ridiculous windmill thing, as if flailing has ever negotiated successfully with physics. Then you sit down hard in wet grass and soft earth, the kind of landing that doesn't injure you, but does lightly bruise your dignity. For a moment, you remain there, blinking, feeling the cold seep through your cloak, listening to water drip and your own breath tighten with embarrassment. You taste the metallic hint of adrenaline, your body's ancient alarm system responding as if you've just fought a bear, when really you've been defeated by a puddle with ambition. You look back at the glint. It's not the bell. It's a wet stone with a mica edge catching sunlight, bright enough to trick a hopeful eye. The mountain, apparently, has jokes, subtle ones, efficient ones. You push yourself up carefully, mud clinging in thick patches. Your cloak is darkened along one side, heavy with water. Your palms are smeared. Your boot makes an unpleasant suction sound as you lift it, the earth reluctant to let you go. You feel a flush of frustration at yourself, not because you fell, but because you let urgency hijack your method. You broke the calm rhythm that was working. Worse, in your scramble, you disturbed the bowl's delicate surface. Your boot sliding churns mud into the puddle, clouding the water. Silt blooms outward in pale brown swirls, spreading across the exact area you wanted to search with clean visibility. A small streamlet that had been trickling neatly along the edge now shifts, redirected by your footprint, and begins to run over a patch of flattened grass where something small and metallic could easily be hidden. You have managed, in one enthusiastic moment, to make the search harder. The locals arrive, not rushing, not scolding, simply appearing at the edge of the bowl with the same calm competence they brought to the storm. They take in the scene, you, muddy and sheepish, the clouded water, the redirected trickle, and the very obvious absence of any triumphant bell. You brace yourself for that familiar modern feeling, the one where a mistake becomes a character flaw and shame becomes a second job. But nothing like that happens. They don't react as if you've ruined everything. They react as if a puddle has been stirred, which is exactly what it is. Someone steps closer, planting their staff firmly on a stable stone before shifting weight. Another person nudges a few small rocks back into place, re-establishing the water's original path. The trickle obeys, returning to its earlier groove. A hand gestures, not at your mud, not at your embarrassment, but at the ground itself. This is where it lies to you. This is where it holds. This is where it gives. They show you without words the right way to approach the bowl. You test with the staff first, feeling for firmness. You step on stones or tougher grass clumps that hold weight. You keep your body angled, not leaning too far forward, respecting how easily wet ground steals certainty. It's not complicated, it's just disciplined. And as they guide you back into method, you notice the gentleness embedded in their practicality. They correct the process, not the person. They repair the situation, not your self-esteem. You realize how rare that is in your world, where people sometimes treat mistakes like entertainment or evidence. Here, mistakes are just information. The ground is slick there, the puddle lies, urgency costs. Your embarrassment begins to dissolve, not because you suddenly feel proud of falling into mud, but because nobody is feeding the shame. The mountain already took your dignity tax. The humans don't need to collect interest on it. You rejoin the search line, cloak damp, boot heavy, pride lighter. The dog passes nearby, nose low, still reading the earth with professional seriousness. It doesn't look at you like you're foolish, it looks at you like you're simply another moving object that should stay in predictable places. You take that as a compliment, in the strange way tired people accept compliments. You return to scanning, but now your scanning has changed. You don't chase glints, you look for forms. You check edges where water deposits debris. You lift flattened grass gently rather than ripping it aside. You feel the lesson sink into your hands. Speed is not the same as efficiency. Excitement is not the same as progress. As the light continues to soften, you notice how the locals manage time pressure without letting it become panic. They tighten their spacing slightly. They focus on the most likely runoffs, the natural collection points. They use the staff to probe without disturbing too much. Their method is calm enough that it almost feels slow, until you realize it is the fastest possible version of careful. And you, muddy, damp, quietly humbled, find yourself grateful. Grateful that your stumble doesn't become a story of failure. It becomes a small lesson in how to be corrected kindly, how to return to the task without punishing yourself, how to stay useful even with wet sleeves and a bruised ego. You breathe in the clean after-rain air, adjust your damp cloak, and keep searching, one careful step at a time, letting patience guide your eyes back towards what matters, that silent bell somewhere nearby, waiting to be found. You come back toward camp with your cloak still damp at the edges and your boots still carrying a private swamp ecosystem. The searchline tightens and loosens like a breathing organism, people checking the most likely runoffs, then pulling back to reassess as the light slants lower. Nobody treats the pause as defeat. It's just the mountain reminding you that daylight is a resource, and resources are counted carefully here. Near the shelter, the fire has been coaxed back into a steadier glow. The herd is calm again, packed into a safer bowl of pasture where drifting becomes obvious. Someone is already working on a replacement strap, hands moving with that unhurried competence you've come to trust, twisting cord, testing leather, measuring by eye the way experience measures better than rulers. And while that practical repair happens, the day offers you another kind of repair: context. A small leather satchel is brought out from under a protected bundle, kept dry the way you keep important papers dry, except these papers are older than your concept of paper. The satchel isn't decorated for vanity, it's reinforced at stress points, stitched carefully, darkened by use. It opens, and what spills into view are not treasures in a greedy sense, but objects with quiet authority, the kind of things that connect these high pastures to the wider, managed world below. You see a clay piece first, small enough to fit in a palm, smooth where fingers have worried at its edges. It's a lump of hardened earth that carries pressed marks, tiny, deliberate impressions made by a carved seal. You don't need to read the marks to feel what they do. They say, this bundle was counted, this jar was promised, This delivery belongs to someone, and someone will be accountable if it goes missing. Your mind, which enjoys pretending modern bureaucracy is uniquely exhausting, has to swallow a gentle truth. The ancient world also ran on receipts. You can almost hear your emails and spreadsheets echoing faintly in this clay. Another object appears, smaller, denser, something carved and worn smooth by constant handling. A seal, or the sort of seal that leaves those impressions. It might be stone, it might be a harder material traded up from valleys, and it sits in the palm with the weight of identity. The carved face is intricate enough to hold meaning at a glance, a symbol, a figure, a pattern that becomes a signature without needing letters. It is personal, but it is also administrative. It turns trust into proof. You watch the way the locals handle it, careful, respectful, but not worshipful. This isn't a religious relic, it's a tool that protects them from disputes, from accusations, from the simple chaos of who said what when goods move across distance. You think, with sleepy appreciation, that the seal is basically an early form of attached is the signed document, except instead of a PDF, it's a bit of clay pressed with authority. The satchel holds more, a bronze pin or needle, slender and practical, the kind that repairs garments and keeps cloaks closed against wind. A small blade, not grand, not ceremonial, just sharp enough to do its job. A bead or two, possibly glassy, possibly stone, the kind of thing that looks decorative until you remember decoration can also be value, portability, trade, and morale. There may be a small lump of resin, fragrant when warmed, useful for sealing cloth, waterproofing seams, fixing what tries to fall apart. And there is wool in there too, dyed fibers, deeper in color than what you've seen spun today, suggesting pigments and processes that come from elsewhere. The high pasture makes wool, the valley world turns it into something that can signal rank, wealth, affiliation, or simply the human desire to not always look like a walking sheep. You begin to understand the exchange without needing anyone to explain it. These mountain people produce raw strength, wool, dairy, hides, meat, labor, animals themselves. Those goods move downward along ridges and paths, sometimes carried on horses, sometimes bundled and dragged, sometimes escorted by people who know where the cairns are and what fog does to confidence. Down below, those goods are counted, recorded, redistributed. Some become rations for workers, some become offerings in temples, some become supplies for officials and soldiers. Some become trade out to other regions, bringing back metal, salt, grain, and tools. Then the flow returns uphill. Salt that keeps food alive through winter. Bronze that turns effort into efficiency. Crafted items that save time and bodies. Maybe even a tablet or two with marks pressed into clay that say, you owe this, you delivered that, you are permitted to take animals to this pasture at this season. The state, you realize, is not only a palace far away, it's also this satchel, this seal, this small hardened clump of clay that turns a person's work into recognized value rather than invisible effort. It is the pulse of organization moving through ordinary lives, sometimes helpful, sometimes heavy, always present. You find yourself oddly comforted by the scale of it, Not because you love taxes, nobody loves taxes, but because it makes these people feel less isolated, less like a romantic postcard from the past. They are part of a system. They negotiate with it. They benefit from it. They sometimes probably resent it. They live inside it the way you live inside yours. And as you look at the seal again, you notice the images aren't only official. They carry the same universe you felt at the shrine, powers of sky and storm, symbols of protection, patterns that suggest more than commerce. Here, trade and belief aren't separate lanes. They share the same road. A delivery can be practical and sacred. A ration can be counted and blessed. A seal can be identity and prayer in one pressed mark. Someone sets the objects back into the satchel, tucking them away with the same care they used to tuck wool under shelter. The strap repair continues, leather tested, tension adjusted, because the missing bell is still missing. And a bell is also an object of the wider world. Cast metal shaped by skilled hands, traded upward, strapped onto an animal so sound can become safety. You glance toward the pasture where evening light is beginning to soften the edges of everything again. Mist will return when the sun drops. The herd stays close. The dog watches. The fire holds. And inside you, something steadies. You are not only wandering in beautiful grass, you are standing in the meeting point between quiet pastures and a sprawling human network, between dew and bureaucracy, between time-scented wind and pressed clay promises, where even the smallest object can carry the weight of connection. The satchel disappears back under dry skins, and the camp returns to its evening shape, as if the whole day has been folded and stacked for later. The pasture is still darkened by rain, but the wind has begun to dry the upper blades of grass, leaving your feet to negotiate a patchwork, slick where water lingers, springy where sun and breeze have reclaimed the slope. The light is softer now, angled and amber, and it makes even ordinary stones look briefly important. Dusk routines start without announcement. Fuel is pulled closer. The fire is fed in small, careful bites so it doesn't flare and waste heat. Damp cloth is hung where warmth can reach it, but sparks cannot. Bundles are shifted away from edges where night wind likes to tug. The herd is encouraged into a calmer pocket of land, not trapped, just guided into togetherness. The dog circles once, then settles with the kind of stillness that says it will do the worrying on everyone's behalf. And still, the bell is missing. In daylight, the pasture feels generous. In dusk, it becomes generous with shadows. Mist begins to gather in the lower bowls, faint at first, then more visible, softening everything the way sleep softens your thoughts. The locals treat the missing bell like a loose knot, not a tragedy, but not something you ignore. A replacement strap is tested by hand, leather pulled, cord checked, holes aligned, so that when the bell is found, it can return to its job immediately. The logic is steady. You prepare for success before success arrives. You sit nearer the fire, letting warmth seep into the damp edge of your cloak and into the stubborn chill rain leaves behind. Smoke curls upward in thin ribbons, gentler now, more domestic than defensive. It smells of earlier work, salt and drying meat, singed herb stems, grain warming at the edge of embers. The glow paints faces in soft copper, and turns tiredness into something almost sacred, the way low light makes even a rough shelter feel like a room. Food gathers itself the way it always does here, through small hands doing small things in the right order. Bread is warmed until the edge is crisp. A thick, sour milk mixture is stirred and softened by heat. A few dried fruits or nuts appear, compact little luxuries saved for the moment when bodies need a reminder that effort has a reward. Everything is portioned without harshness, enough to restore, not so much that tomorrow is weakened. You eat slowly, and the slow chewing gives your mind a rhythm to follow that isn't anxious. Outside, the pasture keeps making its quiet sounds. Water drips from reeds, hooves scuff. A sheep breathes in a long, satisfied exhale. The sky deepens toward blue-gray, and the first star shows up with cautious confidence, like it's checking whether the storm is truly done. Every so often, someone glances outward, not dramatically, just habitually, reading the edge of weather, the edge of herd, the edge of night. Their vigilance is calm because it has never been separated from daily life. Near the hearth, a small set of gestures begins. Nothing formal, nothing that demands an audience. A pinch of salt is sprinkled into the fire, and it hisses softly, brightening for a heartbeat before settling again. A sprig of thyme is laid close to warmth, so its scent rises clean and sharp. A palm touches a stone at the shelter edge, then touches the chest, an echo of the shrine, the same quiet reminder that protection is asked for with humility, and gratitude is practiced, not performed. Then the camp's mood loosens enough to make room for gentle humor, the kind that doesn't need words. Someone notices your mud-heavy boot and nudges it with exaggerated caution farther from the cleanest mat, as if the boot is a wild animal that bites. Another lifts the damp corner of your cloak between two fingers, like it's a suspicious idea, then drapes it nearer the fire with theatrical care. Your embarrassment tries to rise, but the humor drains it away before it can become shame. You find yourself smiling in that quiet way tired people smile when they feel safe. The day gets retold without dialogue. Hands mimic the wind's shove against the shelter hides. Shoulders imitate a goat's offended stance in rain, head lowered like it's personally insulted by physics. A slow shake of the head becomes a summary of your puddle incident, and your own face warms in spite of the cold air. Nobody turns your stumble into a label. It becomes a shared moment, proof that everyone here has slipped on something somewhere and lived to keep working. Mist thickens in the hollows. The absence of the bell feels sharper now, because sound would cut through fog like a thread. The dog lifts its head, listening, then settles again, satisfied that the herd is still where it should be. People shift closer to embers, closer to one another, closer to the animal's quiet mass of warmth. Not fear, just sensible geometry. You hold a cup of something warmed and herb-scented, letting heat travel down your throat like a small lantern. Your eyelids grow heavier, but your mind stays clear enough to feel what this evening is doing to you. It is teaching you that calm is not the absence of problems. Calm is the presence of method, of kindness, of a community that knows how to soften after strain. The fire lowers into a steadier bed of embers. The last light slips behind the ridge, and you sit there, warm at the center, waiting for the next gentle step the night will ask you to take. Night settles in fully, and the pasture becomes a quieter version of itself, edges softened by mist, distances shortened by darkness, everything reduced to the few things you can trust: the warmth of embers, the steady presence of bodies nearby, the faint, wet scent of grass cooling under stars. The missing bell hovers at the edge of your awareness like an unfinished thought. It isn't loud panic, not even worry in the usual sense. It's more like a small itch your brain keeps returning to because unfinished things refuse to let you rest. The locals carry it the same way, without drama, but with that subtle readiness that says, "We will solve this because tomorrow deserves a smoother start." You sit close enough to the fire that the heat reaches your hands, and you watch embers pulse like slow heartbeats. Your damp cloak has dried along the side you turn toward warmth. The other side still holds a coolness, a reminder of rain's stubborn memory. Your boot, the one that tried to merge permanently with the mud bowl, now sits near the edge like a chastened animal, drying slowly, releasing a faint earthy smell every time the fire's heat licks over it. The mist thickens in the low places, and the pasture's sounds become more intimate. You hear the herd's quiet shifting, small hooves adjusting, bodies leaning closer, breath moving through wool. You hear water dropping from reeds in slow ticks. You hear the dog's occasional exhale, steady and measured, as if it has decided to carry the night's responsibility on its own shoulders so everyone else can soften. Then you notice something that doesn't match. Not a ring, not a clear bell note, something smaller, an almost sound, the kind you might dismiss if you were half asleep in your own bed. A faint metallic click, once, then again, muffled as if wrapped in grass. It's subtle enough that your brain tries to file it under random, but your body has been trained all day to respect subtle signals, so you sit up slightly, attention sharpening. The dog's head lifts too. You follow the line of that attention toward the outer edge of the herd's gathering pocket, where the ground slopes gently downward into a shallow channel, the same kind of place storm water likes to travel, the same kind of place a small object might roll into and then hide in damp grass. The air feels cooler there, and mist is thicker, pooling like spilled milk. One of the locals rises without haste and takes a staff, moving toward the edge with careful steps. Another shifts a few animals inward, tightening the cluster so the herd remains compact. Everything happens with the same quiet efficiency you've been watching since dawn. No announcement, no theatrics, just a coordinated adjustment. You stand too because your body is already part of this operating system now. You move slowly, keeping your weight over your feet, testing slick spots before committing, remembering your earlier puddle lesson with a soft internal wince. You do not chase the sound. You approach the likely hiding places where sound might be made by accident. Mist curls around your calves, and the darkness makes the grass look like a single continuous surface. You sweep your gaze along the ground, looking for the smallest mismatch, an edge too smooth, a shape too round, a patch where flattened blades suggest something pressed beneath. You feel your breath quiet, because searching requires stillness more than speed. Another faint click happens, closer now, and you realize it's coming from the staff's tip brushing something hard beneath the grass. The staff pauses. The person adjusts angle and presses gently again, and the click repeats, metal against wood. You crouch, careful not to slip, and part the wet grass with your fingers. Cold moisture clings to your skin immediately. Beneath the blades, you find a small depression where runoff has pressed debris together, needles, silt, a thin layer of mud, and in the middle of it, half buried like it is ashamed of the trouble it caused, sits the bell. It is smaller than your imagination made it, not a grand object, a modest bronze shape with a dull surface, darkened by stormwater and earth. Yet when you touch it, you feel its weight and meaning at once. It is cold at first, then warms slightly from your fingers, as if it recognizes it has returned to the care of human hands. You lift it slowly so it doesn't slip back into the mud. Water drips off in tiny threads. The bell does not ring loudly. Mist and mud dampen it, but it gives a soft, muted chime, like a sigh of relief in metal form. The sound travels only a short distance, yet it changes the atmosphere instantly. It is the sound of found, the sound of together again. You bring it back toward the fire, cradling it carefully, and the locals shift around you with small, satisfied movements. Shoulders loosen, a few heads tilt in approval. The dog relaxes, its posture easing as if it has been waiting for this exact resolution to file the night away properly. Near the hearth, the replacement strap is already ready, because preparation here is almost affectionate. Leather is threaded, holes align, cord is tightened with practiced fingers. The bell is wiped quickly with a cloth, just cleared of the worst mud, so it won't grind dirt into the strap or irritate an animal's neck. You watch hands work, and the simplicity of it feels nearly miraculous, a problem held gently until it becomes solvable. The bell is carried to the lead animal with the calm respect everything receives here. The herd senses the movement, shifting slightly, then settling again. The strap is looped and secured. The knot is tested twice. Fingers press along the leather's line to confirm tension, to confirm security, to confirm that the storm has taken enough and will not take this too. And then, as if the mountain itself wants closure, the animal lifts its head and the bell rings. Clearer now, higher, unmistakable. One clean note that slices through mist and makes the dark feel less uncertain. It isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It simply exists. And because it exists, the pasture feels organized again. You stand there with damp fingers and a quiet ache of fatigue in your legs, and you feel something inside you ease open. Not just relief about a bell, relief about the idea that problems can be addressed without becoming disasters, that mistakes can be corrected without shame, that a community can absorb stress and still return to warmth. You glance down at your boot, still drying, still faintly muddy, and you let that earlier stumble turn into a softer memory. The mountain tested you, you slipped, you learned, and nobody made it bigger than it needed to be. The cairns still stand out there in the dark doing their quiet work. The herd is gathered. The fire holds. The bell has reclaimed its role as a moving lighthouse. The embers glow steadily as you return to the shelter's warmth, and the night, now stitched back together by one small note of metal, feels earned, calm, and safe enough to let your eyelids grow heavy again. You settle back into the shelter's small circle of warmth, and the bell's clean note hangs in the mist like proof that the world can be gathered again. Embers glow low and steady, the kind of light that doesn't perform, just keeps you from slipping into cold. The herd shifts in slow, sleepy adjustments. The dog releases a measured exhale and finally looks almost bored, as if it has decided the night is under control. Your damp fingers dry near the fire. The day has changed you in small, practical ways. Your shoulders sit lower. Your breath comes deeper. Your thoughts, usually eager to sprint, move with a calmer gait, like they've learned the slope and stopped fighting it. You remember the cairns on the ridge, stones that never brag, only guide, and you realize you've been craving that kind of quiet marker in your own life. Outside, the wind loses its sharpness. Mist loosens its grip on the hollows. Stars look steady, then begin to fade at the edges, as if morning is gently erasing them. You lie back and allow yourself the luxury of not monitoring every outcome. If a goat chooses rebellion in the dark, the dog will handle it. If weather changes its mind, these people already know what to do. Your job is simpler now. Breathe, soften, rest. Sleep arrives without ceremony. The fire's warmth becomes a slow pressure on your skin. Smoke, salted, herbal, faintly sweet, wraps around you like a cloak. Half-dream images drift through, wool twisting into thread, milk settling into strength, a palm brushing a stone at the shrine, rain tapping the roof like patient fingers. Even your muddy slide returns, not as embarrassment, but as a gentle reminder that the mountain corrects you quickly and then moves on. When you wake again, it's to quiet, not alarm. The embers pulse like slow hearts. The camp is still. The herd breathes in a unified hush. The bell gives a faint clink as the lead animal shifts, and that small sound feels like a lighthouse beam sweeping through fog. You step outside, careful with your footing, because you have learned that confidence is not the same thing as care. A thin line of pale color rests along the eastern ridge. Mist still lingers, but it no longer looks like a wall. It looks like steam lifting from wet grass. Dew returns, cool and clean, reclaiming every blade. Your boot, now drier, feels less like punishment and more like a finished lesson. The locals begin moving before the sun commits. Someone checks the herd's edges. Someone restores the fire into a warmer glow. Someone inspects straps and knots, yes, including the bell's strap, because trust here is built through verification, not optimism. You watch and realize their steadiness is a skill, not a personality trait. It can be learned. It can be borrowed. The mist lifts further. The pasture reveals itself in layers, darker wet hollows, brighter ridges, stones sparkling with fresh dew. A lark tests the air with a small note, then another. The world looks much like it did when you arrived, but you do not. You have been folded into the mountain's rhythm, and the rhythm has smoothed some sharp places inside you. You walk a little way toward the modest shrine, not to imitate what you don't fully know, but to stand in the same quiet, and let gratitude settle where anxiety usually lives. The stones are cool. The air smells of time again. You understand now that the gesture of offering was never a bargain with fate. It was a way to soften your stance toward fate, making room for effort and acceptance to share the same breath. Back at camp, the first tasks begin again. A quick check of stored goods, a tightening of ropes, a shift of bundles. The wider world remains present in small things. The satchel that keeps clay impressions safe, the salt that makes food last, the bronze that turns work into efficiency. And here, the bell belongs to that same web of connection, metal shaped somewhere else, carried up, fastened on, trusted. Then, because all journeys eventually ask for it, you prepare to leave. No one stages a farewell, and somehow that makes it more touching. A cloak is adjusted on your shoulders so morning chill doesn't bite. A small bundle of dried herbs is tucked into your hand, thyme and juniper, sharp with scent, because remembering should be portable. Your boot receives one last practical tap to knock loose any stubborn mud, as if the mountain is finally releasing its claim on you. You take a few steps away and turn back. The camp sits low against the hillside, humble and resilient. Smoke rises thinly from the hearth. The herd grazes, already committed to turning grass into tomorrow. The dog moves along the edge, calm and watchful. And the bell rings once, clearer now in the thinning mist, threading sound through air, the way a promise threads through doubt. You let the scene imprint itself behind your eyes. Strangers who included you without questions, hands that corrected without shaming, a storm met with method, a small loss solved with patience. You inhale, slow and deep, and you carry the scent of smoke and time into your lungs as if you're storing it for later, for some future night when you will need proof that calm is possible. Then you turn to the stone path and begin walking down through lifting mist and soft dawn light, taking with you the simplest lesson the pastures have given you. Hold your corner of the blanket, keep your steps careful, and trust that even in fog there are cairns and bells that help you stay found. The path carries you lower, and with every step the air grows a little warmer, a little less sharp, as if the mountain is loosening its grip so you can return to your world. The mist thins into harmless threads that catch on grass tips, vanishing. Behind you, the pasture keeps breathing, animals grazing, smoke rising, hands beginning another ordinary day that will become history again. You don't need to hold everything at once anymore. You can hold one thing, the steady feeling of embers in the dark, the bell's note when it was found, the way a cairn stands patiently in fog and never asks to be thanked. Let your mind keep those anchors, the way the locals keep salt in a pouch, simple, light, useful when the weather changes. If your worries try to return, let them arrive without a fight. Let them sit at the edge of your awareness like sheep at the edge of a pasture, close enough to be seen, far enough not to trample you. You have learned tonight that calm is not a gift you wait for. It is a method you practice. Check the knots, warm the hands, take the next step, accept help, and begin again. Your breathing slows, your eyelids grow heavy. The The scent of thyme and smoke lingers in your imagination. Somewhere in that remembered camp, the dog settles. Somewhere the herd presses together and becomes one quiet warmth. Somewhere the bell rests against a neck and promises that togetherness can be heard. Here in your room, you let your shoulders drop. You let your jaw unclench. You let the day slide off you like rain sliding off wool, leaving only the weight of sleep. Keep breathing, slow and steady, until thoughts become mist and mist becomes nothing at all. Softly. End of story. Sweet dreams.